Hello, everyone. How are you? Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Palace. This week's show is on Christian nationalism, and it's going to be another good one. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. I've switched platforms, so if you're on Facebook, register with Melon so we can see your name and comment. I actually have a link for that. This is going to be a really cool new platform. So register with them, and so we can see your comments. Well, we'll all see your comments, but that way we can see your name and all of that. Please keep all comments and questions to the subject at hand. This is a safe space, and we want to make sure it stays that way. I want to give a shout out to our top sponsors, Ruth, Kirsten, Michelle, Ray, and Heidi. You all rock and enable the show to go on. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting it. I have all of the options to do so at sherrypalace.com. Just use the support tab. There are literally dozens of ways to support the show and me. Thank you in advance for supporting my work, but more importantly, thank you for being here and welcoming us into your home. I appreciate you. Before we start, I want to mention a project that I started along with the help of our beloveds, Ana Garcia Lucas, Michelle Saveco, and Mike Zanker. It's called The Moment of Love. It costs nothing and only takes a moment of your time. Our goal is to cover the world with love. All you have to do is let me know your location so I can add you to the map and share the movement with your friends and family. All of this is leading up to a Giving Love Away Day, which is GLAD, on November 6th, where our intention is to flood the world with love. I am super excited and hope you will join us. Again, go to my website, sherrypalace.com, and look for the group on Facebook, A Moment of Love. Spread love by spreading the word. Thank you in advance for your support and taking a moment to share love. Okay, on with the show. Let's meet our guests and get smarter. First we have, let's move this. First, we have Greg Larson. Greg Larson was born, baptized, confirmed, and ordained in the United Church of Christ. He is a trained intentional intern, former police chaplain, church growth, and church crisis pastor. Greg also leads the Beer and Hymns in Detroit, and he is the first and only, to his knowledge, Space Force chaplain. At least it says so on his ID account. Welcome, Greg. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I forgot to change my background from the space station to affirm my space chaplaincy spot, but hey, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're going informal tonight.
All right.
And next we have Tim Hammett. He earned his degree and served in the Presbyterian Ministry for over 20 years. He retired in 2001. In 2019, he retired from the Iowa National Guard, working for the Department of Public Defense. In the early 70s, Tim was drawn to groups who were critical of civil and ecclesiastical systems. However, he saw the same power dynamics across them all, leading him to embody the Who's lyrics, "We Won't Get Fooled Again." Now at 67, he has returned to his first love, music, playing drums professionally since the age of 11, and it's why he hasn't been on our show recently. Welcome, Tim. How are you?
Hey, good. I'll update. 68. This shows you how long it's been since you and I have talked.
I know, right? You should have been here before. So thank you so much for joining this conversation. It's been all over the news. It's actually trending on Twitter today. And I started looking into it. You know, I didn't really think that I had the grasp of what Christian nationalism is until I saw the first sentence that Putin is a Christian nationalist. In my brief study of this, it to me is entirely anti-constitutional. It is entirely anti-American. And I don't know, with the exception of this is just further proving that some of our congresspeople truly support Putin, how we can even differentiate this from a constitution and to Christian nationalism. So I guess I want to start there. Greg, you're on the top of the screen, so what do you have to say about this?
You know, you just tossed out that that word talking about how do we differentiate between that. And I'm a fan of Abraham Maslow, who used the process of self-differentiation when trying to reach this kind of peak of who we are as a human being, self-individualization. There's the word. And it's a process of deep reflection, and I can't fathom Christian nationalism as something that is just, number one, just relevant, number two, that makes sense to people in our world today. What you said about the Constitution and who we are as a people, Christian nationalism just doesn't make any sense.
No.
And that's what I can't wrap my head around in today's news. I don't understand how so many are flocking to this kind of a deep and strong force that's really shoving its way back into society again.
Tim, I understand that you have a speech for us.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I call it a speech as such.
Well, teach us about this. Define it. Give us the nitty-gritty details.
Okay. Well, let me say I'm going to try to keep this within 10 minutes, and I've got a script, so I'm going to go ahead and read from the transcript. I usually don't do that, but I'm so rusty in this. But let's start out, because I'm like the ecclesiastical counterpart to a shock jock. I like to make statements that really shock people to no ends. All right, and we're going to start out with this. First of all, I'm going to start out with a very controversial statement that I believe the United States is a Christian nation. Now, hang on just a minute before you start running to your notes and everything to disprove me. Hang on with me, okay? Because I know you say you can't wrap your head around this, but as I hopefully get through this in 10 minutes, you'll see where I'm going. All right? And I hope I've got your attention enough to where you'll hang on to my words and follow the yellow brick road as we get there, okay, as such. But it's probably not what you're thinking when I say this. Like I said, I have 10 minutes to prove my premise, and I will start with anecdotal dates and go back 35 years from now and move forward, and then go back legally 600 years and move the legal timeline to our current time. I grew up in the 60s, where music was, in many respects, the spearhead of the Cultural Revolution. I'd listened to the mainstream music because it was part and parcel of that movement, but I also wandered off the beaten path to listen to Frank Zappa and the mother of inventions. Zappa was an avant-garde musical genius who was also very much engaged in the political satire of the day. In 1985, Frank Zappa, along with a host of other musicians, even the benign John Denver, appeared before Congress to testify against censorship of labeling albums with so-called offensive lyrics. And it was brought by Tipper Gore, the Democrats.
John Denver was offensive?
Oh, no. He was there against the labeling of the albums that were offensive. Okay. So you had everybody from John Denver to Frank Zappa. That's what I'm trying to get at. All right. And he opened with these remarks. The first thing he says, and I'm quoting, I'd like to do because I know there are some foreign press involved here. They might not understand what the issue is about. One of the things the issue is about is the First Amendment to the Constitution, and it is short, and I'd like to read it so they will understand it, where it says, and I quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances." That is for reference. That's how we started out. In 1986, he was invited to Crossfire debate on censorship. Crossfire was an American nightly news event, debate television program, aired on CNN from 1982 to 2005. His main opponent was the often prickly conservative commentator Robert Novak. But instead, it was John Lofton, a right-wing columnist of the Washington Times, who went after him in regards to censorship of rock lyrics. Here's what Zappa had to say. "The biggest threat," this is 1986, "to America today is not communism. It's moving America towards a fascist theocracy. And that everything that has happened in the Reagan administration. Anyway, I'm going to try to fast forward here. He was almost laughed off stage when he said that. All right, and this is in 1986. And in April 1st, Cal Thomas, if you remember, he was joined at the hip with Jerry Falwell in the moral majority. He jumped ship, and he wrote out a book that came out in 1999, Blinded by Might, Can the Religious Right Save America? The third temptation of Jesus, he writes, was the most subtle and the most dangerous, and it speaks clearly to those of us who want to use politics to usher in the kingdom. Those familiar with the story recall that Satan, who had a lot of practice at this sort of thing and gets new people to practice on every generation, led Jesus into the wilderness. The record says, quote, and he led him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, I will give you all this domain and its glory, for it has been handed over to me, and I will do whatever and give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you worship me, it will be all yours. The temptation, of course, was rejected by Jesus, but today some are giving into it. And the early days of the moral majority were taken up to the mountain, and we saw how we could finally win the battle for Jesus' sake. Unfortunately, and this is what he says, the voice we were listening to was that not of Jesus. And then Randall Terry.
Let me stop you to make sure I understand correctly.
Yeah, go ahead.
So they're saying, because I'm really confused about this, they're saying that Jesus was given this land because the devil gave it to him?
No, the devil tempted him, saying, I will give you all these kingdoms of the world if you will worship me. But he rejected
back
them.
to us?
Okay. All right. Well, I will tell you. In other words, it is not an earthly kingdom. It is a heavenly kingdom.
Yes.
But he tempted him with saying it'll be a political kingdom, and it was rejected. And what Cal Thomas is saying is that the moral majority bought into the temptation and began to advance the political kingdom.
Yeah.
All right. And so I know I'm going to take up way too much time here, but I will tell you right now that the Randall Terry, the founder of Operation Rescue, came out immediately and wrote, I believe Cal Thomas, these are both evangelicals now, his book in many ways is more dangerous than child pornography at Barnes and Noble, and certainly more deplorable in content and aim than some of the most villainous books in history, end quote. That shows you how strong of a reaction he got, because he said that the political climate back in the 90s, early 90s, was giving in to the temptation of giving all these kingdoms. Now, I know we're not going to have time. I've got many more pages. I will tell you, though, this is built into the DNA of the United States through the doctrine of discovery. It is legally defensible. We don't have time, but if you give me more time, I will prove to you that we are in a schizophrenic country, that on one end, we talk about human rights and the Enlightenment. On the other, we're still legally carrying the torch of the doctrine of discovery, which is a religious doctrine. And as late as 2005, the liberal, we're talking about of the Supreme Court, still made rulings based on the doctrine of discovery, which is a legal religious doctrine in regards to Native Americans especially, but it's being still carried out to this day. So my initial premise that we are a Christian nation, it's built upon this doctrine of discovery that is protected even as far as the Supreme Court. And it's not until we face that is why that it's being fought against so much in regards to the critical race theory out of schools, because they do not want to go back and examine those very things. And so that is at the very heart of a, the whole major thing of a Christian nationalism. It's because it's in our DNA. And the Enlightenment.
So we're talking back to the Puritans,
Further than that, we're talking about the 14th century, 15th century. When discovery first started happening in regards to the building of ships and the sailing, not only in Europe, but also going westward into the continent, what is now known as the Americas. The question was asked, what do we do when we, or if we, discover these lands and it's inhabited by people that walk on two legs? They wouldn't even call them human beings. And It was simply that you enslave these people, you take their goods, you conquer the country. In other words, the ecclesiastics came armed. And that has followed us even to this day. It's in our DNA.
Anti-constitutional.
Well, yeah, but you got to remember that it's not constitutional. That's part of the schizophrenia. But you look at the Declaration of Independence, which is the underpinning of the ideology. It talks about these truths are self-evident, that all men are created equal. And 3 paragraphs later, it refers to Native Americans as savages. They didn't have any type of human rights whatsoever. And that's why to this very day, we're still fighting that battle, because we have not opened up the Pandora's box, which also contains hope that once we lance the wound, expose it to the air, then we can start the healing. So I've gotten about a fourth through this, so I will end. I know that my 10 minutes is up. So.
And to your point too, the doctrine of discovery goes way back before the ships. I mean, if we're actually reading our Holy Scripture right, we understand the Roman Empire is guilty of all of that. Sands crossing the Atlantic or the Pacific, all these conquering of lands to make them theirs. They had their own doctrine of discovery. It was all done through militaristic empires. So it's nothing new. We just we
know that this, that it was more codified through Constantine when as a Roman emperor, that he began to politicize this and then began to make it into a kingdom on this earth. And the gospel was promulgated now at the tip of the sword.
Right.
We shouldn't be surprised that American evangelical conservative Christianity is defined by force and by guns, a weapon.
No, what surprises me is our elected leaders are pushing this. They're pushing anti-constitutional. I mean, Marge Taylor Greene is out there bragging that she is a Christian nationalist.
Of course.
They are out there saying this when in our current times, it directly aligns with Putin's dictatorship. He's the one pushing this. So every time they say it, coincidentally, they've also been the same ones who have been supporting him this entire time, fighting sanctions, fighting all of these things. So I can't help but to think that while these minorities, for the last 200 years have been begging, let's make this a Christian nation, let's make this, the Puritans were all about it, that they're finally now getting that strong arm from Putin. It's insane. And it's another way for him to invade our country. And they're doing it in the name of Jesus? My head explodes.
Well, again, it's just like, the Russian Orthodox Church has been restored since the fall of the Soviet Union as an endorsed church now. I mean, and what happened at the fall of the Soviet Union, evangelicals went crazy. They said, the Lord's opened up a door, but all it did was wed evangelicalism with the Russian Orthodox Church, which again had the militaristic, kingdom-oriented dynamic. And that's why from, what's it been, 40 years ago now, 30 years ago, since the fall of the Soviet Union, it's no surprise to me that evangelicals have aligned with Putin. He's a man of the Russian Orthodox Church. All you have to do is connect the historical dots. But the problem is, and it's twofold, that number one is evangelicals consider church history going back to Billy Graham. All right, that's number one. And number two is, and we don't get off scot-free, because you would be surprised who it was that actually ratified and went back and quoted the doctrine of discovery, then no less than Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So it's not like, well, the Democrats are just Scott. No, It's not true. It's not true. And I will tell you that I was doing battle with the Reconstructionists and the Theonomists back in the late 80s and early 90s. Liberal Christians were asleep at the wheel when this was taking place, and still are to this day. I honestly believe that our libraries need to be also with the opposing side and read this stuff. Rushdoony, who was the father of Reconstruction, came out with his stuff in the 80s. And if you've not read him, this stuff was boiling on the stove back in the 80s. I am not surprised at any of the stuff that has taken place. And it's reached its epic point in Donald Trump, because he is the perfect example. If we saw how that priest, when they first touched soil in what we now call the United States, who had also armed armies with them, they were given the orders that if they don't convert, you kill them, you enslave them, and you take their properties. We would be horrified today. But this is personified in the present political structure. We shouldn't be surprised at any of this. What we should be surprised at is being asleep at the wheel. And we still are.
Yeah, we had that conversation, Tim, before we hopped on the show tonight, talking about the congressional hearings about music back in the 80s. And you had mentioned Frank Zappa and John Denver. Well, as a child of the 80s, I remember specifically listening and hanging on every word of the lead singer from the band Twisted Sister.
Oh, yeah. And he testified too. He testified as well. And laid them out. Laid them out.
I pulled up his transcript from his conversation with Al Gore.
Yes.
And here's what he had to say. Get this.
Please.
Part of the transcript, this is how the conversation went. Senator Gore says, "What's the name of your fan club?" And D. Snyder replies, "The fan club is called the SMF, Fans of Twisted Sister." Senator Gore says, "And what does SMF stand for when it is spelled out?" And D. Snyder responds, "It stands for the sick motherfucking fans of Twisted Sister." And then Senator Gore's response was, "Is this also a Christian group?"
Yeah. See,
and
asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, D. Snyder, being as brilliant as he is, says,
"That's
I do
right.
not believe profanity has anything to do with Christianity. Thank you." But there's a prime example of both sides of the aisle being asleep at the wheel, and actually, maybe even driving the wheel of Christian nationalism way back then.
Right.
And now we find ourselves trying to separate ourselves from like the other side and creating a wider divide in between.
Right.
One of the things that has really resonated with me throughout my journey is do not become that which you hate. And with this, we are. I mean, we have been after Iran for 30 years, 40 years, because of their Islamic rule, because of their religion running their country, because of all of those things. A lot of the evangelicals want to nuke them. I've heard so many times, let's turn Iraq or Iran into a piece of glass or a pavement or something to that effect. Yet we're doing the exact same thing with Christianity, and it's allowed because it's our faith. Now, in doing so, we are still losing our rights. We are still becoming a religious nation, which our forefathers fought against. So if we continue down this path, we will truly become that which we hate. Iran, religious nations that are run like this. And again, the fact that our elected leaders are chiming in this and screaming and bragging about this terrifies me.
Let me share. Let me break in with something here. Let me read. This is in 1452. Pope Nicholas V wrote in regards to the question, again, as those who were discovering the various lands, if they found people, and I'm not saying other humans. This is, first of all, it's like these creatures that walk on two legs. What do we do when we find them? Here's what he wrote, and this is a small sliver. Quote, invade, search out, capture, vanquish, subdue all Saracens. Do you know who Saracens are? Muslims. Okay, all right. And pagans whatsoever, reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his and their use and profit. This provided a matrix for all discoveries, bar none. This is the beginning of the doctrine of discovery. Now, in regards, the Supreme Court in the United States in 1823 wrote this. This is Johnson versus McIntosh. Chief Justice John Marshall's opinion in the unanimous decision held, quote, that the principle or doctrine of discovery, he's going back to this statement, gave European nations an absolute right to the New World lands. That has never been overturned. And by the way, Ginsburg quoted that in 2005 as precedent. I mean, it's all there. It's all there.
I think the part that, what I said earlier about not being able to wrap my head around, Tim Sherry, is this idea that here we have who we would consider progressives citing this doctrine.
Correct.
So I fully understand that Christian nationalism exists and that it's woven into the fabric of our society. Right. So much so that it's, to pull on one thread means that this whole thing is going to come tumbling down in some way, shape, or form. Which asks me, it inspires me to ask this question. What are they afraid of by disowning our doctrine of discovery?
Okay, well, first of all, it's giving it up to people that we have oppressed. Stop and think about what happened when the liberation of Dachau and the other prison camps, what happened. The first thing that the U.S. troops had to do was stand back, because those prisoners that were at Dachau, who still had strength, literally tore some of those guards from limb to limb. And that, that the Nazi guards had to fear that if that ever took over. And we have precedent of that in scriptures. When you have the children of Israel who were in captivity under Pharaoh, the first fear that they have is they're outnumbering us. We've got to kill the firstborn. We got to reduce their population. It's all there, whether you believe it's myth or whatever. There's still a lesson to be learned here. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that Mark Charles claims that there is a type of PTSD that is what he claims is not only the post-traumatic stress disorder and historical trauma that has been passed down to those who have been oppressed, but also the perpetration-induced trauma. You can't, as a human being, suppress people and not have some type of trauma in yourself. And this is why that I think collectively as a nation, we are scared to death at this, because we know somewhere in the back of our minds that to release this type of thing would rain hell down on top of us. And I really do believe that even the people that we love very much and still support this oppressive potential government, this is one of the reasons, because it's been passed down. And I know
it goes down to equality. They're scared to death of equality.
Yep. And
to call them a Christian movement and be afraid of equality after Jesus hung out with all the sinners, the Samaritans, all of that, and then to use Jesus's name to push this is gross.
But again, we have constant historical precedent. If you study the Third Reich in regards to Dietrich Bonhoeffer and read his works, this is nothing new. I mean, we are in perfect parallel with the formation of the Third Reich. It was the German Evangelical Church, and without its support, Hitler could not have come to power, period. And it was Dietrich Bonhoeffer that formed the Confessing Church. Greg, you know who I'm talking about. And
Yeah.
it was the pushback, but eventually he was executed because he spoke to the government. And this is what early Christianity did. It spoke to and against the Roman Empire. We have to be prophetic again and speak to the government. Martin Luther King said the same thing. We don't do their bidding. We hold their feet to the fire. Even if we're thrown to the lions, we hold their feet to the fire. Because governments have never been friends of Jesus. Period.
Yeah.
Period.
Even the understanding that myself as a pastor, I think the biggest complaint about the way I serve the congregations that I have served is when I speak to social justice issues, and then the response after, say, a 10 to 15 minute reflection / sermon on social justice is met with the response, "You ought not to speak politics from the pulpit." And these are the people that support the church. They're right in there, and they have this fear. They don't want to go there. They don't want to touch it.
Yep.
But social justice has been demonized. My ex, who is a full-on MAGA, actually came home one day and said, "Oh my God, the Anne Frank house has turned into social justice warriors." He was a Jew. And I'm sitting there going, the Anne Frank house has always been social justice. And he's like, how dare they speak political? And I'm like, that's the whole point. So when social justice is demonized as woke, or, it's basically just equality. When it's demonized and says, well, those are the people that are wrong, all of this can run rampant. It gives power to the supremacists. It gives power to politics and takes all of the power away from ourselves, which Jesus gave us. I've always been stumped at the Holocaust. I wonder why or how these people did it, and we are living this time right now. We are living the same times as Jesus did in fighting the political things and saying that love means more than law. And we're still here 2,000 years later. I can't wrap my head around. Have we not progressed? Are we still that animalistic that we need to be tribalistic and give power to a powerless God? Because their God is so small. To need our control, to need our efforts to contain people, to control people is weakness. That's not power.
Well, again, it goes back to the schizophrenia, and I'm not saying that schizophrenia necessarily, because I'm not a psychologist, that there are two personalities involved. But nonetheless, on one side, a schizophrenic will know what reality is, and then all of a sudden they'll switch, and they don't know what it is. Our country, in many ways, was founded on that, and the age of the Enlightenment it's like the sun was rising, but yet there were shadows. And we've been struggling with that. Human rights, this, that, and the other. But again, it was not given to Native Americans. Why? Because they own the land, all right? And secondly, in regards to our economics, what do? We enslaved Africans to do the work for us. So much for a Christian work ethic, okay? It was built on the back of blacks, all right? So you've got this human rights idea that all men are created equal, but I hear people today that if you're not an American, you don't have these rights. No, that's not what the founding fathers even said. But at the same time, they still held slaves. And then you take that 200 some odd years into the future, you still have that conflict and that tension. And that's why we cannot understand the likes of Ruth Ginsburg on one side is a champion of human rights, but at the same time, quote, a 19th century doctrine that was, not 19th century, that was ratified in the Supreme Court that goes back to the 14th century by refusing the Native Americans in New York their lands. It doesn't make sense, but I do have a theory, again, why this takes place. I think that we have a national trauma that we cannot face. It's like people who have experienced horrible childhood abuse, and they finally go into counseling. The first 30 sessions are going to be able to face everything that they have experienced, all right? And anybody that has not been through counseling properly who have been abused, the likelihood of the abused becoming the abuser is so true. It's not unlike the state of Israel today. Why do they persecute the Palestinians? Because they were persecuted for years, and they have not faced their own trauma. And that's why, by the way, that America is so friendly towards Israel. I absolutely believe that we share a common trauma with those things. And now, we weren't the abused, but we've become the abuser.
You know, and that it's all perpetuated by the church.
Correct, and that's a whole other thing. That
one of my favorite writers, Phyllis Tickle, talked about our periods of enlightenment that come around about every 500 years since the time of Christ. And what's interesting is there's this element to society, this reawakening to how to love your neighbor comes around, and then people start to get it. They start to rise. There's a movement going, and it goes so far. But at the same time that this movement is rising, there's an equal and opposite movement to keep things status quo.
That's right.
And so the harder one group fights out of this heart of passion, out of this heart of justice, out of trying to keep that arc of love and justice that's present in our scriptures bending the right way, there's another side that goes just the opposite. And it's happening all over. And to the extent to now in the last 7-8 years, it's become militaristic. I think one thing that Trump did give was license to the violence of the pushback.
Correct.
Even so that there's a group more recently.
Trump enabled and authorized white rage.
Yeah, and white rage through Christian nationalism.
Mm-hmm. And let me add that let me say I apologize to all my Baptist friends and brethren with the statement I'm about to make, but it's true. I was brought up in the Southern Baptist Church and also left the Southern Baptist Church because of its racism. And Donald Trump could not have gone into office if it were not the votes of the constituency of the Southern Baptist Church. And there's only one reason, that they maintain the name Southern Baptist. I mean, I live in Iowa. So when I go down the road and I see such and such Baptist Church, Southern Baptist, that makes no sense. Because this is not the South. It's an ideology. All right? Because when they split along political race lines in regards to slavery, and they retain that to this very day. Now, the Southern Baptist Convention did come out with a statement about 25 years ago in regards to its condemnation of slavery, but it is so buried in their documents. You'd have to be a librarian to find it. And I assert that if I was a pastor of the Southern Baptist Church and I had membership classes, that would be in the first week. And I'd be also lobbying to have the name changed. There's only one reason it's still called Southern Baptist. I mean, it's all alive and well. And the problem is that we try to cartoonize racism and people that are against the progressive movement as if they're backwater people. That's the most dangerous thing we can do, is to define these people as backwater hicks. There are some most intelligent people on the face of this earth, just like there was in the Third Reich, but they know what they're doing.
Victory TV, it's a Christian network. They perpetuate a lot of this stuff. There's a program called Flashpoint that platforms ideologies such as the new apostolic reformation, which is a rapidly accelerating and dangerously underreported worldwide Christian authoritarian movement. And it practices faith healing, exorcism, and dominionism. This idea that Christians must take control of government, business, culture, in order, of course, to usher in Christ's return to the earth, to which I'm a firm
This is
believer.
Paul. This was not Jesus. This is
Exactly.
Paul. Paul wanted control. Paul wanted all of that. Jesus was like, just go chill, drink some wine,
Yeah.
eat some fish, love your neighbor.
Yeah. Earlier this year, this group met in a packed Georgia arena, and 4 religious leaders stood up together to recite this. If you ever hear it, it's on Twitter. It's
I
if you just
saw
look
that.
up, the Watchman Decree, and it's bone chilling what they say. I've got a quote here from part of it, but just listen to these words. Whereas we have been given legal power from heaven and now exercise our authority, whereas we are God's ambassadors and spokespeople over the earth, whereas through the power of God we are world influencers, whereas because of our covenant with God we are equipped and delegated by him to destroy every attempted advance of the enemy, we make our declarations. And just to give you an idea, a couple of these declarations, like number 3, we decree that our judicial system will issue rulings that are biblical and constitutional. 4, we declare that we stand against wokeness, the occult, and every evil attempt against our nation. And 5, we declare that we now take back our God-given freedoms according to our Constitution. I mean, oh my God. And then they go into this thing called the 7 mountains. I don't know if you're familiar with the 7 mountains.
With it.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. The 7 mountains are business, government, family, religion, education, go figure, DeVos, entertainment,
Fascism.
and
Everything you just listed is the root of fascism.
right, and this last one, media. The 7 mountains.
Now, 25 years ago, Marianne Williamson was on Oprah when she had the Oprah show. And I'll never forget it because she said, we've never tried love. Why don't we go ahead and try love now? We've never tried it. And as an evangelical at that time, I thought, well, no, we've been trying this since Jesus. And that was such a naive thought of me. You know, it's like, okay, it's been 2,000 years. We should have been able to at least figure this out, at least figure out how to do it. And we're back into these times. I mean, it's literally been 2,000 years. And Jesus came and said, just love. And we're still trying to grapple with that, still trying to find ways around it and to be everything that he fought. I mean, he fought the religious power. He fought the government. He fought the judgment. He said, go win nations with love. It's just, I mean, when the height of hypocrisy is that enormous, the delusion, the ego, I don't know how that we're not doomed at this point. I don't know how we save our non-religious government when religion is trying to take over in the name of Jesus.
But I go back again of everything that Greg had read in regards to the, this platform. They didn't come out and use the word Muslims, but we know that phrase in there. It's there, all right. But who else did they mention in there by name in the text? It was your pagans, right? Okay, and the influence of these people, witches, and this, that, and the other. Tell me how that's changed after 570 years. I keep going back to this, of the declaration of the doctrine of discovery. I'm going to read it again. Invade, search out, capture, vanquish, all, and subdue all Saracens, which are Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his or her use in profit. There's their profit. What kind of profit are we talking about? All right. But we have to ask ourselves a question: why is this spell still over our legal system as far back or as early rather as 2005 that the Supreme Court is still appealing to this. That's what has to be faced. I don't want to become jaded. We should be horrified by this, but we shouldn't be surprised. This wound has never, there's been never a national dialogue. As a matter of fact, they're threatening to sue teachers if you dare even speak about this. So this shows you that, if you believe in a devil or not, doesn't matter, but somebody's cage has been rattled. And that's now why that teachers cannot even bring certain books to school. They're having children come with transparent bags to make sure that their books are checked at the door. They want to make sure that these books are not coming in on school property. Why? Why are they afraid of the truth? Well, we know.
Because they can't repeat it if we know about it.
That's correct.
What we learn from history is the reason to repeat it.
That's right.
If we're knowledgeable, if we understand their bullshit, if we call them out on their hypocrisy, then they can't repeat it.
But again, it's deeply embedded in our legal system.
But you say that and it makes me want to throw up my hands.
I know. We can't. That's what they want you to do. That's what they want you to do. We have to still be the prophet that speaks to the state. Just like the early Christians that came out of Palestine and moved west because of the gospel, spoke against the Roman government and especially Constantine. We can't lose hope. Again, it's Pandora's box, but hope was still in the box. Still in the box.
I think there's this idea, though, that still catches on the utmost fear of what happens when we do, because we can turn the tables. You're right, Sherry. We can push back and call them out on their bullshit. But I think the end game is in an understanding the psyche of take.
Right.
Whatever it is that we're taking. If we're to truly reconcile that means we have to give it back.
That's right, and that's a whole other topic in regards to restitution.
Right.
And
so, but that's like the catch, because I think it's so subtle in the back of progressives' minds.
That's right.
Because we also understand that, hey, if we go this far, holy shit, are we going to lose something? Oh, right. Yeah. So then, Sherry, you're right. Then we throw up our hands and say, where do we go from here? Part of that is because I think you're right. Number one, we don't know. Number two, subconsciously, we don't want to know.
Right. And let me add, ecclesiastically speaking, this is why, the mega churches spend millions of dollars on production, because they want to have a celebration as such. And I'm not against celebration, but in regards to, if it wasn't for the church, the state would not have had the ideology to move this forward. All right. So what is the job of the church when it's faced with being the one who's promulgated this type of evil? It is lamentation. And that is not a drawing card to the general public, is sackcloth and ashes. But I think that's our only option at this point. And that's why I stay out of the church.
Okay.
That's me. I'm not saying anybody else should, but that's me. There's not the lamentation that to me is the citadel or the real mark of repentance, that we have done something really, really bad.
Or when the church is teaching power over love, segregation over unity,
right.
Judgment over mercy, it's become irrelevant. And so they can find their relevance in politics. And so it's just another tantrum in my book. It's them saying, no, we will take control whether or not you give it or not. And then ordaining God, which is what has happened for 5,000 years. I mean,
right.
The whole Old Testament is about people pulling this bullshit, and it's justified as opposed to learned from, to go, whoa, we shouldn't do that. It says here that, this happened and this was bad. Do you know they raped kids? Do you know they kidnapped people? Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, the prophet spoke out against that.
Correct.
If we look at just the larger, broader picture of the Exodus story, yes. and then fast forward a few years to the time of Solomon, and the prophet's telling Solomon, hey, don't go back there to build the way that your ancestors were forced to build. And so how did Solomon build the temple? How did Solomon build this massive army? On the backs of slave labor.
Correct.
You know, it was all warning. And we're told that time and time and time again in this liberation theology. Don't go back there. Well, that's the warning, right? So you learn from history. That's what we want to do. But the catch still goes, well, we got to learn from history, but then we need to repair it. If we're going to repair it, that takes some mighty big,
a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, the first step to healing is admitting you have a problem.
That's right. Exactly. That's the first step. And that's what's being denied. And I believe that's part of this collective trauma, is that you deny it. That's the only way that you can function within your trauma, is deny it ever happened. But anybody that's been to counseling knows that as difficult as that is, that wound has to be uncovered and has to be dealt with.
It's a direct line to the schools at this point, because again, accepting the issue is learning about it, learning about how racism has been systemic, learning about how women fought to get their rights, learning about the indigenous people. So if they don't teach about it, then they really don't have to accept it. Then they really don't have to acknowledge it, and therefore nothing needs to change.
It's not
yesterday about the difference between progressives and conservatives. Conservatives were the ones that did that fought the Civil War. Lincoln was a progressive. So we get so locked up into these Republicans, Democrats, and those types of things, but the conservatives don't want change. They want regression. That is what it is all based on. So progressives, and again, the parties, fluctuate and they go all in between, but progressive means change. So all of this fight of progress at this point is again taken back to history for thousands of years, and either we stand or we succumb. There's really no other way around it, but we are at that point.
And again, it goes back to that you can oppress people's human rights only so long. And it's like one of the early philosophers said that, they become worse than the people that they oppress. In other words, they can keep it down so long, but it takes a toll on them. It wasn't unlike that in Nazi Germany when, the troops that they would gather from, as Hitler began to take over Poland and the other surrounding countries there, they would conscript these guys into the Nazi army, but they weren't necessarily Nazis, but they were ordered to nonetheless shoot people on command. And if you get into some of the writings, I mean, they had to have a fresh supply, because these guys, after a while, shooting men, women, children who were innocent, it took a toll on them. And it happens also on the same national level. It takes people get weary of it, but they can't locate the weariness or change because they are traumatized themselves. They don't want to face that they've been a part of it. And by the way, we've all been a part of it. It's not an us and them. I don't like that. I mean, I'm white. I don't, when I go out and I put the keys in my car and go down the road, I never think about going down the road and getting pulled over because of the color of my skin. All right. That is an entitlement that I have. At the same time, I have to face my latent racism every day in order to stay afloat, because I have it so much better than people of color. So I've been a part of it too. And it's not until we assume this responsibility, and we can also say that, well, that part of the church did that, I'm not a part of it. Yes, I believe in the Catholic nature of the church. Whatever the church did in the 15th century or in the 6th century, I'm a part of that. Do you think for a moment that if I go over into the Mideast and I'm captured by radical Muslims, that they're going to ask me what denomination I am? They don't care. It's the fact that I'm Christian, and they connect the dots of the history of it. So,
it's one lump sum.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
It is. We're all connected. We're all guilty. We're all guilty.
Yeah. Own it. The onus is on us.
It is on us.
I think you want to say something. What were we going to say?
The onus is on us. And the big umbrella us too. If we go back to the original church, the Holy Catholic Church, and the oppression that it's offered for, more than 1800 years. It's an organized institution. We understand that this model of organization, this governance, is not really different than an oppressive militaristic regime.
Correct.
It's misogynistic. It's patriarchal. I think for massive global change to really happen, we'd have to have this radical, progressive pope that's willing to deconstruct everything that is St. Peter's Square. That's got to come tumbling down first.
I agree.
And if that were to happen, I think we'd see something. But like we've talked about, we can go so far, and then there's always a stopping block. And unfortunately, that core belief system that they're so locked into, that everything that they've been indoctrinated into, this pattern of faith for as long as they've been immersed in it. God willing, send me a pope that's like younger than 30.
Yeah.
Somebody that's not so entrenched and so hard-headed in their belief system that they can't go the extra distance that's necessary for us to embrace something that while we say progressiveness, we also have to say in that word that progress also means looking back and making corrections, and doing the right thing, and not just blindly moving forward without looking back.
If you don't progress without healing, it's denial. And it's burying your head in the sand, because healed people can get through, or unhealed people can get through the day. There's not going to be any change in their life. There's not going to be any progress. There's not going to be any of that. So in order to progress, you have to heal. And again, no one is going to heal unless we accept this as a problem.
Denial's not just a river in Egypt.
That's what my mom always used to say.
Right.
She's like, I'm the queen of denial, and it's not the river in Egypt. And she was a devout evangelical. So yeah, she was saying that back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we're at the top of the hour already. For everybody out there, this is a totally new platform for me, and I missed all of your comments. I don't see them tonight. I went to the chat to try and find them. I didn't get any of them. So just figuring out what I'm doing, I will definitely make sure that I address those in Facebook and YouTube, and I believe we were streaming on Twitter today too. So I missed our audience, I really did, and missed all of their comments, but I will definitely follow up with that. This show needs to be longer. We need to have another one of these to try and fix this situation, and to educate and get people to say, look, we need to progress, we need to heal. Greg, thank you so much for joining us. So good to see you. Any final words for us?
Thank you for having me on, Sherry. It's always a pleasure to be with you here in this space, and to share in healthy conversation. I think things have to start with conversation, and an honest conversation, in owning, as the first self-proclaimed Space Force chaplain, let me say, Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah.
And we need to fix it.
I'm going to make a meme out of that.
Good.
Tim, thank you so much for joining us. What do you have to say as your final word?
I still hold out hope. I'm 68. I could be on my front porch yelling at kids going across the front lawn, but I have hope still. All right. And it's this. All right. You can only say so long, don't go for that cookie jar. And I'm hoping that there's such a juvenile behavior in the United States that says, why do they not want me to go in that cookie jar? I think I'll go in the cookie jar. And that is the analogy in regards to why don't they want us to read these books. And it may be that they'll be reading those underneath the sheets at night with a flashlight. And they will privately start changing. And then publicly start changing.
I think that America also has a rebellious enough attitude within them to say, if you're going to tell us we can't do something, we're going to. So even if their control
I agree.
does take effect, then hopefully it won't last for long because we will rise up like the America we've always been.
Right.
Okay, now I got to figure out how to close this show. Thank you guys so much. Greg, Tim, you guys are my family. Thank you so much. It has been an absolute joy. I will see you guys soon. I'll see you backstage.
All right. Okay. Very good. Thank
you. Okay. Take this information, run with it, go do your own research. You do not want to fall back into everything that we have done before. Thank you so much to our fabulous panel. Be sure to tune in, share this with your friend. Next week, we will be having Thomas J. Ord, who just is releasing a new book called Open and Relational Theology. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe, and thank you all for watching and participating. I missed your participation, though. If you enjoyed the show, share it with your friends. We are headed back to the VIP to continue this conversation. Become a member so you can chat, too. Go to my website and use the support tab. Don't forget to check out Moment of Love while you're there. Join us. Thanks again, and we will see you next week. Walk in love. Mwah!